everybody worships something. Everybody has their dogmas. Everybody has things that they believe essentially without evidence. And the atheist message was always, we're people who analyze these questions. We're people who plug in those gaps in our knowledge. And if we can't justify something, we're not going to believe it. And with that, they levy this closed-minded accusation against the religious. And I guess there's one thing to say that they do it as well. Do you think that they do it more so?
There was a very interesting moment from a recent conversation between Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's a former atheist, now Christian, and Alex O'Connor, who is an atheist, but I believe a Christian in the making. Let's watch this clip together, and then I'm going to give you guys some of my thoughts on the back end as to why I think that this is such an important dialogue. Let us begin.
And here I referenced Bertrand Russell when he wrote the essay, Why I Am Not a Christian, where he then really goes on to say, if Christianity were to disappear, we would have, reason would overtake, and we'd be, would have so much progress and so much humanity and so much reason. And then now we actually have the empirical reality where Christianity is waning, and what we are getting in the highest temples of learning, the temples of reason, is not reason, it's unreason. And I would want to have a conversation with Christopher Hitchens. And when I brought this up with Richard Dawkins, he did acknowledge it, and he finds it frustrating. And I understand why he's frustrated. But I think we have to go back to this idea of, as human beings, we're much, much more complex than just the material. The atheist assertion, we're insignificant, we are nothing. I forget what Richard used to say about, we are so, he said, I forget the exact quote, but it amounts to...
Blind, pitiless indifference.
Yes, and we're no more, what was it, we have no more significance than some kind of organism.
Right.
And that's just not true.
Mm.
And anyway, I also want to point out in this reading journey that I have taken on, that there are more and more people, the more we discover about the universe and the more we discover about the world, there are more and more scientists, especially on the hard science part, who are saying there is something rather than nothing. And I think that's sort of the conversation I would have with Christopher Hitchens. The problem of the activism, the evangelizing of atheism, I think that creates a barrier that robs one of curiosity. If you just shed that and you come, and you shake that off and you think, I'm open to change my mind, then you could change your mind. You could see things that you wouldn't see when you say, I don't want to see it at all. In other words, the accusation they level against people of faith is also true for them. They really do believe in being atheists, in not believing in God. And so that is why the whole conversation about within the Christian West ended with, let's agree to disagree, until the world came into the West, until Islam came and other forces came in, and that is why it's reopened.
Well, the idea is that everybody worships something. Everybody has their dogmas. Everybody has things that they believe essentially without evidence. And the atheist message was always, we're people who analyze these questions. We're people who plug in those gaps in our knowledge. And if we can't justify something, we're not going to believe it. And with that, they levy this closed-minded accusation against the religious. And I guess there's one thing to say that they do it as well. Do you think that they do it more so?
If you read the works of the apologetics, it's really this whole exercise in trying to grapple with that, where they're saying, we're not believing in something just because we believe in it, and we're sticking to this really very serious attempts at trying to understand, to explain, and there's a great deal of doubt and self-doubt. So I think it is really on the other side where there is this certainty that there is nothing, and then trying to get everyone to come to the belief that there is nothing. And I'm not saying this is true for every atheist.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a caricature to say that Christians they all just believe without evidence and without thinking. It's like, oh, have you read the apologetics? Have you read the gallons of ink spilled over debating and trying to justify positions? Now, of course, atheists will say that, well, we do that too, and we do it better. But you're someone who's been on both sides of that. And I think when atheists say, oh, Christians, they just believe it because their parents told them to, they're thinking of like their uncle at Thanksgiving. Yeah, they're not thinking of the William Lane Craigs or the Alexander Pruses of the world. They're thinking of someone that they know personally. But similarly, I know more atheists who are just atheists because I've never seen any evidence, whatever, haven't given it much thought. Than I know atheists who've sort of reasoned their way into that conclusion. I think it happens on both sides, in other words. But you're someone who's now lived both of those sides and interacted with both of those sides, and you said a second ago that you feel like more closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side than the Christian side.
More closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side, and more certainty. Again, not for every atheist, but definitely if you take atheism and you turn it into an activist position, because then you're selling something. And that's what is, it's blinding, isn't it? You become so confident. And I think even a little more than confidence, there's an element of arrogance. And this is it. There's really nothing more to know or learn or find out. We have it. There's nothing.
I mean, people will say that that's what the Christians say. They say, I have my answer in this book, and I'm a humble Christian who has the answer to the biggest question of the universe and knows the truth, and there's no need for further inquiry because we have the scripture. It tells us the way things are.
I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure that's the case for a lot of Christians. And I have to tell you, on a personal level, it is wonderful to have the answer, to have this relationship with God, a God who's loving and whom I talk to and pray to and feel a sense of peace. But then on a more intellectual level, when you take the position, there is something. I think you are then much more involved mentally in proving or even finding out. The curiosity is very high. It's finding out, well, if there's something, what is it then? And where can I find it? So I think that opens up just a whole lot more in terms of learning and reading and finding out.
Consider, for example, someone who has visited an island. Imagine a person who has physically stepped onto the shores of the island, felt the sand beneath their feet, seen the landscape with their own eyes. This person has no doubt of the island's existence. Compare this with someone who has only seen a map of the island. While the map might seem convincing, this second person could reasonably entertain doubts, wondering if the map is accurate or if the island might merely be a myth. The traveler's certainty is justified because their knowledge is grounded in direct experience, whereas the map reader's skepticism lacks the same foundation. Similarly, a Christian who has encountered God personally through spiritual experience and answered prayer through the felt presence of God in their life, they have a dual foundation for belief, namely external evidence and internal confirmation. External evidence might include, arguments from cosmology, fine-tuning the historical records of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. But then there's the internal confirmation that comes from experiential relationship with God himself. The feelings of peace, the conviction, the guidance, the transformation that aligns with scriptural promises. For this person, certainty is not merely a wish fulfillment or a sentiment of hope, but it's a logical outcome of a lived reality. As John 1:1-2 says, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our own eyes, which we have looked at and our own hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. Now, obviously, the disciples actually encountered physical Jesus in the flesh, but there still is faith in play there because people also who met Jesus, encountered Jesus in the flesh in the first century, crucified Jesus. So what they're saying, though, is that they know that they've encountered the word of life. And that is something that a modern believer, once you've actually met God on his terms, repented and believed and entered into a relationship with God through Christ, once you've done that, you actually have the same basically benefit and promise that this verse is describing. So now, hang with me here. Contrast this with the atheist who denies God's existence. Their stance often rests on the absence of sufficient evidence to convince them personally, yet their position essentially is, I see no compelling proof. It's inherently weaker than the position of someone who has both experiential and evidential proof. Without firsthand experience or definitive disproof, their denial remains a claim of uncertainty rather than a firm rejection grounded in evidence. In the allegory of Plato's cave, prisoners are confined to a cave, seeing only shadows cast on the wall by objects behind them. To these prisoners, the shadows are reality because they have never seen anything else. However, one prisoner escapes the cave and experiences the fullness of reality firsthand. Upon returning, this individual would be certain of the world beyond the cave, while remaining prisoners might doubt or dismiss that person's account. To the escaped prisoner, certainty is reasonable because it is based on their experience, whereas the prisoner's skepticism arises from ignorance of this greater reality. This echoes what John 8:32 says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." A modern analogy can be drawn from the Matrix. Within the simulation of the Matrix, a person might suspect glitches or inconsistencies, but remain uncertain of the external world's existence. However, someone who has taken the red pill, experienced the real world, would possess a certainty that a still plugged-in individual could not match. The doubter's uncertainty is understandable given the limited perspective that they have, but the awakened person's certainty arises from direct interaction with reality.